I would love to add this idea of walking together. I can't think of any more blessed place to walk together as a couple than in the forest. In the forest, we feel the reverence of the forest, and we almost can't help but be present because perhaps we're noticing wildlife and we're listening to the sounds and we're just breathing in that fresh air. And I think that that is just a wonderful place to connect.
It was actually when I was pregnant and my husband and I were walking in the forest, which rarely happens, that I admitted to him that I was having big issues with being dependent on him financially for the time in which I was raising this child and not working. And it was the only walk we went on in the whole pregnancy, and that's where it came out. So
wonderful. And perhaps that may not have come up.
Right,
If you
it
had
definitely
been in
wouldn't have.
And then what happens is that then you end up holding this kind of uncertainty or this what can turn into a resentment with a relationship that just builds, right? And this interferes in so many different levels, right?
Yeah.
You see it on so many different levels, whether it's a mom that ends up having issues with breastfeeding or this kind of whole conflicted postpartum.
Or an unhappy baby.
I was going to say, all that anxiety and those worries, the baby is feeling all of those, right?
Yes.
We know so much more. And Nicole, you can speak to that, I'm sure, about the conscious life of that unborn child.
Absolutely. And would we want our child to have their first emotions as anxiety and fear? No, of course not. So dealing with our own anxieties and fears are.
And what's a major reason why some people are having troubles conceiving that you've come across?
The biggest emotion that comes up is guilt. Guilt from termination of a prior pregnancy, or making the choice to adopt out a child. Perhaps they were just in a situation where they couldn't raise a child, they wanted to adopt out. Also, guilt from simple things too, doesn't have to be so dramatic. For instance, a couple of my clients have come up with in hypnosis that they felt guilty that they were babysitting their little brother, and something happened to the little brother, or himself fell down.
Oh, interesting.
It's just something as simple as that puts the seed in their mind that, oh, I won't be a good mom because I can't take care of a child.
And that can prevent them from
Absolutely.
becoming pregnant.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Even fears, right? Like fears about the way that they were parented, you know, that they will repeat patterns even if they don't consciously want to. Fears that they're going to repeat those patterns. Also, it's really interesting if you look at someone's family kind of history when it comes to conception. It's really interesting to ask about kind of ideas and, you know, things that people say like, well, my mom, it took her 7 years before she got pregnant with me, so I'm not expecting to get pregnant. You know, I've been trying for 3, so I've still got another 4 to go, right? Like these concepts that come in on a very subconscious level is very interesting, very interesting.
People trying in their 30s, and for their parents' generation, that's old. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're in your
Yes.
30s, you're old.
Yes.
Never mind the parents' generation, it's like you pick up the newspaper and for crying out loud, you know, egg quality is decreasing, and women are getting pregnant too late, and it's like all these really negative messages that women are getting.
And that's taking care of your spiritual life, isn't it? To really question those beliefs that we hold inside ourselves that perhaps we weren't even aware that we were holding.
Exactly.
Until perhaps that couple is struggling, and then it's when we delve into the why and we question, is that true? Is that true because my mother took 7 years to conceive me, it will be the same for me.
And this is a perfect example of how children are our greatest teachers.
Yes.
Here's a couple just trying to have a child, and they're already being led on a whole healing journey
Yes.
in order to conceive.
Isn't that the most amazing thing? Truly.
It is.
You're right, Meredith. They're not even here yet.
Yeah.
And we're learning.
They're learning,
Yes.
they're already teaching.
Yes.
That's right.
But I guess the other thing is that we can't forget that it's not always just first babies too, right? Like this is part of it.
That's
and,
right, that's right.
You know, and sometimes it happens when people go to try to conceive a second baby. Other issues, questions come up, and Denise, she can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I get often questions and thoughts and ideas that women are continuing, which is great, to nurse their babies much longer than they did before, but not as long as in past history. But they've been told that they need to stop breastfeeding to increase their fertility. And it really isn't an all or nothing situation, you may want to look at, depending on how old your baby is or your child, to decrease the night nursings, particularly between that 11 and 3 a.m. block. Often when women stop nursing at that time, there's often a return of ovulation if they are not in a little bit more of a regulated manner. And maybe you can talk physiologically a little bit more about that and why that is.
Well, there's with nursing, especially in the hours of at that nighttime hours, is that increase in prolactin that's produced at that time. So when you start to decrease night nursing, not night nursing completely, but just within that short window, is basically it starts to allow the prolactin levels to decrease. When the prolactin levels decrease, that stops the suppression that happens from the ovulation process. So basically the body starts to realize that ovulation can resume, and so you get these more regular cycles coming back in. This is why some women, you can go for quite a long time without getting your period back, right? And some women get alarmed by that and they're not quite sure. It's very normal, right? Although not always to be recommended as a method of birth control. For some, right? But that's just, from a physiological function, it's like allowing the ovulatory process to come back into place is obviously very important when you're trying to conceive a baby.
So yeah, and it's something that a lot of care providers don't realize. It's you need to stop this, and it's not good for your baby, and it's not good for yourself. And culturally, all across the world, it is a very commonality that women continue to nurse throughout conception, throughout their pregnancy, and sometimes even after they welcome that next child. So, yeah, very interesting.